Alright, so here's the plan. Traditional Historic. Key to the Archive. 4 copies. Windfall. 4 copies. Get rid of those lands. Hullbreaker. 4 copies. That's the deck. Alright, team, how do we fill this out? Nissy who shakes the world. I think I want to make it just Izzet. So, one of the things that I think is going to be pretty important for making a deck like this work, in addition to just effective early interaction, is going to be how reliably can we get Delirium for Unholy Heat. Shark Typhoon. I think Shark Typhoon's a little slow, and also I don't want, if I can avoid it, to play spells that don't trigger Hullbreaker Horror. Is Gadwick not available here? I suspect we probably won't be able to... I don't see a draw to Gadwick, who is kind of expensive to tap out at sorcery speed and all that. Does Darcy or Delver fit? I don't think that a deck playing 4 Key and 4 Windfall is going to be aggressive enough for that. We're losing Divine, Veto, Rest in Peace, Teferi, Wrath of God. Yeah, we are losing Wrath of God. This is true. This is true. But we're kind of not a traditional control deck, necessarily, in the sense that this deck is certainly much more about just making it to Hullbreaker Horror. Iteration? Yeah, if our curve can be low enough, then Iteration is a powerful card. And I'm assuming we mean Expressive Iteration, because I don't think I can make Galvanic Iteration work in this list. Don't think your 4s are playable in a Historic Horror deck. Really? I mean, you gotta ramp to Horror somehow. What do we have for instant speed interaction? Preferably stuff that's cheap. You don't want to actually draw 4s, though? Don't we? Don't we want to draw a 4-drop as often as possible to play on 4? Like, ideally, I want to curve 1-drop interaction, 2-drop interaction, 3-drop interaction, 4-drop ramp spell, Horror. You'd rather have cheap spells and get to 7 the hard way? I mean, at that point, if you're not ramping into Horror with one of these cards, then you're probably just playing a really bad creativity deck, right? Gonna make a post-ban deck? I mean, I guess this is technically a post-ban deck. I haven't been really considering pre-ban versus post-ban while doing any of this stuff for the last day or two, to be honest. Ironically, I think this might be a decent Lear deck, but Lear post-ban probably not terribly exciting, huh? Why is Horror our goal now in Historic? Can be counter now? Yeah, but who plays counter spells, so do you care? Like, I don't know if there's ever been a matchup where Hullbreaker Horror being uncounterable has really ever been relevant. Hullbreaker Horror still doesn't die to Unholy Heat, and I think that's the biggest appeal to it to me. Definitely willing to board a bunch of Aether Gusts. That's usually good. Is Divide by Zero still good? So I don't think that Divide by Zero and Fading Hope are completely unplayable in Historic, but I do think that if you're going to play them, it has to be because you're playing Lear and that they're good forms of card advantage. And I don't think Lear is playable in Historic post-ban. Or post-nerf, where you can't actually removal spell on their turn. That's like too critical to Lear's function to get rid of. Perhaps more dragon decks and less bouncy spells, they start taking more Disdainful Stroke across the board. Yeah, if in the context of Alchemy, I think that the Hullbreaker Horror Can't Be Countered nerf does have some impact in that it isn't that is Disdainful Strokeable. But at the same time, in Alchemy, most Hullbreaker Horror decks were not good against Disdainful Stroke decks already. Not because of Disdainful Stroke, but because the Disdainful Stroke decks played cheap removal. And Hullbreaker Horror is just kind of fundamentally bad against cheap removal that kills it. Part of why I think it kind of has a... The people who play aggro decks and don't like to lose to Horror have a very inflated opinion of Horror's strength, in my opinion. And I think it's because they don't play with cheap removal that kills Horror and haven't experienced how much that makes Horror just not a good card. Yeah, Leer with nerfs is probably not playable, in my opinion. Or at least not in the shape, not in the shells that we currently view as Leer decks. If Leer is playable, it's because of some really weird different deck that I don't even know what that looks like. What's the difference between Magma Spray and that other new red card that exiles? Are they literally Flameless Bolt? Are they the same card? No, Flameless Bolt hits Planeswalkers. Okay. Leer is playable with discard effects. Discard effects are one of the better sorcery speed things that you would want to play with Leer, but even the decks that played discard effects still wanted to, like, play Archmage's Charm at instant speed and bounce spells at instant speed and a ton of removal at instant speed. So yes, Leer as it existed had sorcery speed things that were good with that aren't affected, but the playability of those sorcery speed Leer synergies was pretty much in large part subsidized by how good the instant speed interactions already were. Bolt hits walkers? Yeah. That is helpful. I could theoretically, like, play 2 Flame Vest Bolts and maybe not be horribly punished by that. I could play, like, Bonecrusher Giant or Brazen Borrower, technically. Actually, you know what? I guess Bonecrusher Giant isn't a bad way to help turn on Delirium for Unholy Heat. And it gives us a 2-drop into a 3-drop portion of our curve. Similarly, we did like the Brazen Borrower interacted positively with Hullbreaker Horror in the sense that it gave us multiple things to Horror. I mean, this is technically a shell. Is Standard just dead on Arena now? No, I don't think so, but I don't personally view myself playing it in the near future, just because I tend not to play formats that don't have upcoming major tournaments. But, you know, as soon as they announce an Arena Open for Standard, it'll be as alive as any other format. Prior to, like, a week ago, Historic was a dead format to me because the most upcoming event was Alchemy. I tend to just kind of tunnel vision into one format at a time most of the time. If I wanted to play Historic with an aggro deck that didn't feel hopeless like some of those Mono Gruul matchups, what should I play? I don't think that there's any deck in Historic that doesn't have some hopeless matchups. I think that is just typical of older formats because of the strength of some of the more linear, weird edge case decks. The Big Blue Attack Land. I suspect that if we're going to play a creature land with this deck, it'll probably be Den of the Bugbear. I don't think without Alrund's Epiphany it's worth playing the 7-drop land, or, well, the 7/7 land. Maybe that's not true, but I kind of suspect it is. This is a weird deck. Still even go so far as to say that aggro doesn't exist in Historic. I don't think that's the case. I think that a lot of the aggro decks that previously existed and were disruptive against the combo decks got pushed out for a while because of the food decks. But I mean, you could say that Phoenix is technically an aggro deck, and I don't think that you're totally wrong. It's just not what people mean when they ask for an aggro deck. But functionally, it is often an aggro deck. What happened to Bone Crusher not being good? I mean, I need interaction, and admittedly, Bone Crusher being 2 cards is cool with Hullbreaker Horror. I also like the fact that if you discount Bone Crusher Giant with Discover the Formula, you get a 1-drop and a 2-drop. That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, Bone Crusher Giant does fill out multiple slots on the curve for a low amount of mana. And Key to the Archive and Unexpected Windfall both actually reward us for having a little bit of inherent card advantage because we get more selection in terms of what we're discarding. Am I playing Jwari Disruption in this list? Probably. I think I need probably one less something. Probably one less Brazen Borrower. I think I want more lands than this. 27 is probably the lowest number I'm comfortable running. Alright. So let's see. Do we want Hall? No, I guess I actually really would prefer Den of the Bugbear in all likelihood. Is it way too cheesy to run Glasspool Mimic to copy Horror? Yes, because if I untap with a Horror, we've already won. I could try to run Spikefield with Horror, but I don't know that there's actually that many things that Spikefield hits in Historic. Is Aura still around? Yes, but most of its creatures have 2 toughness except for the 1-drop protection creatures, and I don't think that's enough of a reason to run Spikefield. Not when tap lands is downsides. Okay, pathways, probably some canals, definitely some steam vents, definitely some storm carved coasts. Maybe some Sulphur Falls? I might not actually be able to afford Sulphur Falls if I'm playing like Spire Bluff Canals. It's funny how much pathways make the checklands worse. Yeah. Don't think I can afford to run a Field of Ruin or anything like that. Is it just 8 bait? No, hold on. I need Fabled Passage. I absolutely need to remember to play fetch lands in a Unholy Heat deck. Part of me sort of wants to play Gear Hulks because you can discard them to Unexpected Windfall to put 3 types in the yard for Unholy Heat, but that's probably too cute and not a good idea. Kind of wild to me that Adventure is such a wildly powerful mechanic and still not good enough for Historic. Well, you can thank banning Time Warp for that. Adventures was a totally playable archetype when it had access to Time Warp. It actually still would be a playable archetype if it wasn't for the Alrund's Epiphany nerf, too. But I think the Alrund's Epiphany nerf hurt it too much. But, I mean, I've definitely played Temur Adventures. It's actually closer than you would expect to a playable deck in Historic. Like, much closer than you'd expect. I could probably build one in the next 10 minutes and it would be pretty playable. A lot of that comes actually off the strength of Fae of Wishes, which if you have a Lucky Clover in play, gets a copy of Thud and a copy of... what's the name of that spell? Blue-green spell. What's your name? What's your name? Body of Research. And then for 7 mana, you just put like a 30-30 into play and thud them. Any drafting tonight? No. No drafting. I usually don't tend to draft unless there's an upcoming tournament for it, and there hasn't been any limited tournaments, any major limited tournaments scheduled from what I know. Okay, well, I think I'm actually probably going to have to cut the Spire Bluff Canals. Maybe the Stormcarved Coasts, actually. Because I think I need 6 basics. And I need to turn off the thing that stops me from searching for basics. Okay. Izzet Turbo Horror? And what are we putting in the sideboard? For 1, we're definitely switching these Aether Gusts. Don't mean I'll drain Tribal like Clover, but just the adventure cards in general, it seems they hardly see any play. So, the thing about adventure cards is that pretty much every single one, with the possible exception of Lovestruck Beast, is designed to be a card that the 2 modes function as card advantage positive, tempo negative, in the sense that both halves of the card are not an effect worth the amount of mana that you're spending on them. Even with Bone Crusher, Stomp on 2 into Bone Crusher on 3, you're getting an underpowered 2-drop and an underpowered 3-drop that add up to like 1.5 cards worth of value. So in a format where where the opportunity cost of playing the adventure creatures isn't cards that do more for the mana cost, then adventure creatures are totally excellent and they're the best thing to be doing because, well, you're not giving anything up and you're getting free card advantage, functionally. But in Historic, there are much more powerful 2-drops than Stomp, and there are much more powerful 3-drops than Stomp, or rather, much more powerful 3-drops than Bone Crusher Giant. So the opportunity cost of playing Bone Crusher Giant is you get a little bit of card advantage and lose a lot of bit of tempo. Disappointing this deck isn't called highly questionable. If we played Teamer Adventures, it would be. Okay, what are we doing here? What are we putting? Borrow is on rate on both sides. That is assuming that a 2 mana to bounce something is on rate, and that is, I think, wildly untrue. I would say that Brazen Borrower isn't on rate on either side. If it cost 1 and 2 mana, it would be on rate on both sides. Similar to how Bone Crusher Giant cost 1 and 2 mana, I think it would be on rate on both sides. But like, Petty Theft is an effect that is maybe playable at 1 mana, but I don't know if any deck except a Leer deck would actually play a 1 mana bounce spell. There's no cards that bounce non-creatures for 1. That's true, but also there's just because it doesn't exist, I guess, doesn't mean that it would be super strong if it did exist. Like, there's no Revitalize for 1 mana, right? There's only Revitalize for 2 mana. But Revitalize for 1 mana wouldn't instantly be a super hyper playable card. In fact, in older formats, it still probably wouldn't see play, because the tempo loss in terms of development isn't worth paying 1 mana to gain 3 life and draw a card. Now, some decks would have synergies that they would want to play that, and I think that that might actually have some niche applications that might make it playable, but illustrative of I think, the point that like, I guess my original point was I don't think Petty Theft is a playable card not attached to Brazen Borrower, and I think that it's almost only barely playable attached to Brazen Borrower. What is it supposed to sideboard in Historic? I have like no clue what the metagame is. What do Izzet decks actually put in their sideboards? I guess I could play like counterspells, maybe? I don't know, is Negate a good card? I guess I could play Torrential Gearhulk if I wanted to. Is that a good card? Malevolent Hermit. I feel like that's probably too slow. Soul Guide? Is 4 Flame Blast Bolts not enough? I mean, I got 4 Flame Blast Bolts and 4 Aether Gusts against Phoenix. I think that's supposed to be my game plan. Plus, I think Hullbreaker Horror is kind of just a inherently strong card against Phoenix. So, I mean, I guess I still need to care about, like, Rakdos Hand Hate. That matchup's probably just horrible. How do I fight Rakdos Hand Hate? What's your plan versus Green-Black Cat? I'm actually not certain how good they are against Horror. So I think my plan for now is just try to Horror and see what happens. Maybe that's not actually functional, but I don't know. We'll find out. Is that Selesnya Humans deck that did well last PT still around? I believe that it basically got completely pushed out of the metagame by Green-Black Food. I guess I could look at what Phoenix plays in their sideboard. Does MTG Goldfish, like, actually have a metagame page for Historic? Kind of. They play Dual Shot, Soul Guide, Pithing Needle, Abrade, Aether Gust, Negate, Brazen Borrower, Mystical Dispute, Crackling Drake. I can play Mystical Disputes. Alright. That's not embarrassing. I mean, Torrential Gearhulk probably is wrong, but if I wanted to play more card advantage, I mean, I guess I'm already playing Discover the Formula, but what about more card advantage? We're going to be playing with this after this, yeah. I could try to play Commit, but it doesn't seem exciting. Oh, I guess I can play Narset. Narset might help Unholy Heat a tiny bit, but raising my curve doesn't make Expressive Iteration happy, does it? I'm probably still supposed to play Narset. Narset good against all decks. Could play Prismari Command? Is that useful at all? I don't know. I could play Aether or Anger of the Gods. What matchups is that for? Oh! Hold on. I forgot about the existence of 4-mana Chandra. No classic Grave Hate like Cage/Lantern. I feel like 4 Flame Blast Bolts and 4 Aether Gusts is enough for those matchups, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that. Who's to say? But yeah, I feel like I gotta give Torch of Defiance some respect. Is that like better than Key to the Archive or Unexpected Windfall in some ways? Well, I mean, I've got 1, so we can put 1 in the board. But that's definitely card advantage, and it's a thing that ramps into Hullbreaker Horror. So, well, let's do 2 of that. I don't need 3 negates, I don't think. Invalid deck? Why is it an invalid deck? Oh, you just weren't giving me the prompt to craft the cards. Alright, well, let's give this a shot, I guess. Maybe it's something.